Rudy walked from the mirror in his bathroom to the door, then turned back in the direction of his reflection. He took a long look at his toxic green eyes and the slight pink hollows of his face, and swept his hair back off his face with one hand, examining so hard he barely breathed. He let go of the hair, relieved when the look of almost 30 wasn't to be found, not yet. He found himself smiling and scoffing. What's 30 supposed to even look like? If this is it, I'm not complaining. Although it wasn't like his age would magically appear before him 17 days from then. 17, Rudy thought, about to walk back out of the room. That's the age Jeanette was when we met. She hadn't minded when he told her how old he'd be turning, and the memory of her response brought a smile to his face, but soon turned to frown when he remembered the looks he'd received the day before, having brought her there, and the remarks he heard. Rotten cherry was given new meaning with Jeanette there. Not only was he perceived as spoiled with attention, but now he was seen as filthy rotten for being with a girl so much younger. Rudy stopped and turned back to the mirror. This time he straightened and looked skeptically at his reflection. He was lucky to have maintained youthful skin, but then what gave away how much older he was? He blinked and finally saw it. He had been looking for something that looked old on him, but completely missed the thing that looked too young on him. His hair color. It wasn't the shaggy layers, but the blonde and dark blonde bits, contrasted sharply with the darker brown, dyed portions of his hair. Darker brown was good on him, but black would be too strong against his complexion, and the blonde too light. Anything in between could be just right. How was your day with Lucille? Were you good? Rudy, of course I was. I trust you. I just love your reactions. So, about your day. Today was... It was... not good. I missed you too. Really, though, you're not usually like this. Did something happen? Your face tells me a lot right now. Did something come up about me? It felt like I was set up. Drake told Lucille what happened that night 8 months ago when you came over and attempted to violate me, and I had to kick you out. I thought I was going to her house and then later I would leave so she could go out with Drake and I'd come here. Instead, they were both there, and when they started in with questions like, how do you feel about your life and your relationship with Rudy since it started? What did you miss about him? And have you read about Stockholm Syndrome? I thought we had been through all of that a couple months ago talking to Drake when we reunited. I could have just left, but I had to defend you and set the record straight. Speaking in defense of me is something I will never require of you, especially when it has to do with what happened the night I tried to have my way with you. And however, I am interested in hearing what you told them. Well, I recounted for them the entire story from the moment we were introduced in the supermarket. I'm listening. Well, the night we met, I wasn't certain of my feelings for Dane, as I'd never been in love before, and certainly hadn't ever seen a naked body before the night I met him. Could you just skip the details about Dane's body, please? Of course, I was busy questioning if what I felt for Dane was a healthy bond that families typically feel, and I was just unused to it when you walked up, and it was like the sight of you froze my thoughts. For the first time that day since putting my clothes on, I had to stop and check how they looked on me. I almost couldn't speak when you asked for my name, and you seemed aware of it. In fact, you smiled the way you're smiling right now. I was definitely aware of it. I even introduced myself to you as Dane's cousin before I knew the truth, that he isn't, and when you shook your hands with me, I savored the feeling so long I brushed my teeth with the opposite hand that night to ensure I wouldn't wash it by accident. I felt ridiculous. I didn't know I'd see you again, but I hoped I would. And yet when I saw you again, I dreaded you seeing me. I thought I'd certainly do something foolish. Sure enough, you caught me staring at you and Dane as you talked outside. What helped me talk to you the first time we had a conversation was the way you treated me like you knew me already. In turn, it made me feel as though I already knew you, even though I didn't, and like I was afraid that you might say something in front of Dane that was an inside joke between us and not the other way around. I wasn't certain I could trust you, but then I didn't know whether I was overreacting about Dane being in my house, and it was too overwhelming to talk to Lucille about. Then, when you asked me to meet you, there was no way I could argue with you about feelings I was insecure about. I almost wondered if you knew better than me, and trusting you blindly was a requirement I rebelled against. The unknown made it dangerous, and every week I was left with more questions about you. Even though we were getting close, when you dated me, I did begin to let go of my inhibitions, and then the rate at which I came to understand you further and respect you, I hadn't adjusted to it, and then trust I had in you became frightening, and all the more dangerous because I was introduced to the feelings I hadn't known existed in me, and you tapped into them almost effortlessly. It upset me that you found a way to do that. You triggered something in me that couldn't be put back to sleep. I felt the same way about you. I hadn't been so smitten in a long time. I found myself revising the plans by inserting fantasies about you, and then I'd have to start all over again and find my place, but I couldn't rid myself of the feelings they induced, and I kept the notes. You wrote fantasies about us in your agenda. True, I've never read them. Don't worry. I feel like it would be wrong to. There's something I've wondered about a long time, but I never asked. How did you know there would be a next time? I didn't know you'd come back to me. That was a surprise twist I don't even want to question. I just know I couldn't be more lucky that you reconsidered me. I marvel at that every day. No, I meant, when we first went on our pretend date, you wrote me a note about when I would like to be kissed goodnight. You asked if you'd rather it be right then, when you would drop me off, if I would like to save the kiss for later, and then you gave 2 options for later, next time or when Dane was around to witness it. So how did you know I would go out with you again? From the way you opened up with me. At first you were self-conscious and super quiet, but as the hours passed, you had pressed mine more confidently as we walked from store to store, and you began vividly telling me little random personal stories as though I was already an old friend. At the end, when I dropped you off, it was like only then that I did remember you'd go inside to him, and I felt confused that I already felt conflicting emotions about losing you to him. Also, I should have told you this a long time ago, but when you weren't ready to be kissed and I kissed your hand instead, I wasn't prepared to kiss you either. My self-control began to slip from that first date, and when you looked at me with a bewildering excitement and shame to admit it was there, I think I had actually corrected myself wrong. I said that I had meant that I wanted to know that you could get into your house alone, but it was like you felt my attraction in that moment. Well, I remembered that you had originally told them to say that I was going over to an unnamed friend's house for a sleepover. Originally, I had considered it, too, letting you sleep over. I thought I'd be able to handle it. After all, we didn't know each other very well, and when I suggested it, but I took you to that ice cream parlor instead, because by then I already knew you enough to find myself considering the temptation as being too great to even show you my house yet. It took me a while before I invited you over, and then I'd had to make it the day I introduced you to Tessa so you wouldn't be alone with me. Anyway, that first night we went out, when I got back home, I regretted so much that I hadn't kissed you and wished I'd been able to, that I couldn't sleep. When I woke up the next day and saw that you hadn't slept either and sent me a text at 2 a.m, I called you back before I'd even started eating breakfast. Then you told me Dane had almost kissed you, and he'd confided in you, and I wished all the more that I had kissed you. There's something else, a detail I never told you. Dane called me after I had talked to you. He wanted you that night. He was afraid of how he felt and asked if he could live with me to avoid doing something with you and regretting it. I didn't tell you all this time because I wasn't sure you'd believe me, and I thought maybe you'd take it as me setting a double standard. No, I don't see it that way. I believe you. You're right to think I might have believed you back then, but I do now. There's something I never told you about either. Dane came to my house the night after you had to carry me in because I fell asleep, but then you had to spend the night because you'd driven me home in my car. Someone, either my grandma or his mom, had told him I wanted the sheets in the guest room I washed the sheets in the guest room and assumed that would mean I missed him. He had come over and waited for me to return home. I came home late that night, and he gave me back his house key. He told me he'd felt guilty for his desire for me when we were together, and that in order for me to be in love with you, I must love everything about you. Well, I do. In a way, it was like he gave me permission to be with you, and even though I already knew I didn't need his permission, the only reason I didn't tell you is that I was afraid you would get jealous even though nothing happened. He just said a few things, handed me the key, and left. Jeanette, darling, I trust you. You're no longer his. I have no reason to feel threatened by him in the slightest. Anyway, you were telling me our story from your perspective. That isn't the end of it, is it? No. Then you introduced me to Tessa, who gave me a makeover. You didn't really need the makeover. You were already sexy. I just wanted to recognize it when you looked in the mirror. I wanted you to have the confidence you needed. Thank you. Thank you for what you did for me, and thank you for what you've just now said. By the way, when you encouraged me over the phone toward Tessa, you talked about how if neither one of us took lead and had the courage to begin a relationship with each other, we might always regret it, and then it could eventually tear the friendship apart because we'd both be waiting for the other one to acknowledge that there's something more there. Even though you were talking to me about Tessa, I was in love with you, and I was motivated by what you said to pursue you. I don't know if it was because I hadn't been sleeping, or if it was because of the stress, but it got out of hand, and I've forgiven you so many times for that night. I've let it go. I knew then, just as I know now, you weren't behaving the way you had the night I'd come over to your house and we'd started kissing on your couch. I know you love me, and I trust you, that you won't ever harm me. I am happy with you. My life has been wonderful ever since we started our relationship, and I missed all the good things about you. And for the last time, I do not have Stockholm Syndrome. I can guess who Drake has been talking to. He probably has been talking to Tessa. That reminds me, though, the first time I heard about Stockholm Syndrome was through the note Tessa left us. I had read about it afterwards, didn't really relate to it, but you explained it to me, knowing what it was, and it seems like it's not common knowledge. So I was wondering, how did you already know what it was? A girl I know had Stockholm Syndrome. She was my sister's best friend, Violet. Yes. You've mentioned her a lot in the past few days. You've asked about my past within the past few days, and she's part of it. I've been waiting to hear more of that story, actually. You said there was more to that you would tell me later, and you hadn't. Will you tell me now? I'll tell you, but it's not a happy story. That's okay. I've got you. If I start to cry, you'll hold me, won't you? Okay.